Hi everyone, my name is John Schwartz and I am the founder of Partner in Aging, which is a local company here in San Diego that helps connect older adults to resources as it relates to aging well. For today's presentation, I'd like to talk a little bit about the different options of aging in place versus what it looks like to potentially move to a retirement community. On a day-to-day basis, I field a lot of questions on cost and what it just looks like to go through both scenarios. So I'd like to highlight on a higher level each option. So today, the agenda will go over a couple key bullet points. One is that AARP came out with a study several years ago showing that nearly 90% of people, those 65 and up, wish to age in place at home. This is remarkable. 9 out of 10 people want to do so, but the question then becomes, is that even possible? What are the costs of aging at home? And then if someone does need to move to a retirement community, what does that look like in terms of comfort and cost? And the common question is insurance, what does insurance cover, if anything? So as we go down the PowerPoint, we look at robotics. I have a slide up here, which hopefully at some point I'll figure out how to turn to video. But the future of aging in place at home is there will be an integration of robotics that help us with day-to-day chores, such as cooking. And these things are happening today, primarily mostly in Japan, but I think we're soon to be coming to mass adoption here in America to help us with day-to-day chores and tasks. There's another one called the Labrador that's out that helps retrieve, that's a robot that helps retrieve medicines, food, you name it. So all very exciting technologies. The idea, if someone needs care, bringing in-home care is something that is incredibly salient and something that we work on a daily basis. In-home care right now is a topic that I think I'd like to spend a lot of time on during this presentation. Former First Lady Rosalind Carter said there are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. Caregiving is something that we should be thinking about on a daily basis. Maybe one of you has cared for a mom or a dad, a husband, wife, a friend. The reality is, majority of us will need some form of care at some point in our life. Most caregiving is carried out by an unpaid family member. But the reality is that if you need care, it's not always possible for family members to provide that care for a litany of reasons. If a spouse is just not physically capable, or a family member lives too far out of the area, maybe an adult child is busy with their own family or working. So where do we find these in-home care providers as we wait for the technology of potential robots to support? Well, one option is through a group called a home care agency. And there's a distinction that we hear in this industry, and I wish they did not have such a similar name, but we have home health versus home care. And so home health is what the industry defines as anything that is of skilled nature, meaning help with physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. A skilled, accredited, trained person is what home health is. Typically, not always, but typically home health is covered by Medicare. But home health workers, think of like a nurse to change a bandage, someone that is needed for a higher skilled task, only come for a small period of a day or a week. If someone needs help with a basic activity of daily life, such as bathing, dressing, meal preparation, medication management, that's what we call home caregivers. And so there's a group that companies that provide home caregivers called home care agencies. These agencies now, and referring these pricing to San Diego County, mostly all of Southern California, the caregiving agency price has truly skyrocketed over the past couple of years throughout this COVID pandemic. And when I started in the field of home care almost 8-10 years ago, the cost was about $25 an hour. And at that time, the community would say, $25 an hour? I cannot believe it's that expensive. But as you can see through my slide, that cost is now closer to $33 to $40 per hour of care. And that can really add up if someone needs a substantial amount of hours of care per day. Some of the pros or the positives of going through a home care agency versus, let's say, a private caregiver, which I'll touch on in the next slide, is that caregiving agencies, they screen all of their caregivers. They do an FBI and Department of Justice screening, and so you can be relatively assured that that caregiver is at least does not have any criminal record. The second pro is that most caregivers, or all caregivers that come from these agencies, have insurance, such as workers' compensation, and the caregiver is bonded. And so if that caregiver, whether they legitimately or not, injure themselves while working for you or your family, that the caregiving agency provides that workers' compensation insurance. Another positive is caregivers, like any other employee, they are frequently getting sick or calling off or last minute changes. So at times, I don't want to say all the time, but caregiving agencies generally do a decent job at having a backup caregiver if needed. So here are some of the negatives that I've discovered over the years, is that the cost of these home care agencies they're really expensive, at close to $40 per hour. Like I mentioned earlier, this care can really add up. So if you multiply $40 an hour multiplied by 1 day, that's over $800 a day, which equals $800 a day multiplied by $30 or 30 days a month. That can be $24,000 a month if one goes through a home care agency and if someone needs around-the-clock care. So it's incredibly expensive for people to have this service. In addition, the hourly minimums that caregiving agencies often require now are 4 hours, 6 hours, 8-hour increments. And what I have found is many people don't want someone there 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours. Sometimes people just need an hour in the morning to get ready and then they're good to go. Caregiving agencies, unfortunately, are unflexible or not flexible with accommodating that request. And one of the other problems I see is that the client, this older adult, is never able to meet the caregiver before the first day that care starts. And I find that it's a really uncomfortable or potentially awkward moment where you get a knock on your door and it's a lovely caregiver who the first time you're meeting, and then maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes later, that caregiver is helping one in the bathroom or taking a shower. And it would be nice to at least, I think, meet that caregiver beforehand, but so many of the agencies, it's just not a possibility. And the other issue with this is that in agencies, caregivers, even at $35 to $40 an hour, caregivers are only making about 50% of the hourly wage or less. And so caregivers typically make $16 or $17 or $18 per hour when they're working for an agency. And the challenge I see there is that if you're making, and I'm speaking again in San Diego County, if you're making $16, $17, $18 an hour, it's very hard to live in coastal, somewhere on the coast, whereas somewhere on the coast, that's where people who can afford the $40 an hour actually live. So you're seeing caregivers making these extremely long commutes, and that travel time is stressful. Cars have issues. Caregivers tend to show up late when they're having to commute from long distances. And then in addition, what I found is truly the best caregivers tend to work for themselves. If you are an outstanding caregiver, typically you don't want to work for an agency because that agency is taking more than 50% of the wage that that you might be making. So on the next slide, I'd like to talk about what a private caregiver could look like. That is something, the work that we at Partner in Aging do. We connect individuals to private, independent caregivers. And so some of the pros that I see in this are it's less expensive. And one can find, so what that looks like is one could find a outstanding caregiver for potentially $25, maybe $30 an hour, opposed to that 35 plus hour through a home care agency. Another pro is that the job is more flexible. Home care agency caregivers are relegated to a strict regulation of what a home care agency caregiver is allowed to provide, such as home care agency caregivers cannot administer any medications. And so if one needs, let's say, eye drops, that caregiver can't help that older adult with their eye drops. And so private caregivers, depending on their comfort, depending on the comfort of the older adult or their family, really can do whatever that's agreed on. There is no minimum shift typically when working with a private caregiver. And so if we could find someone that lives relatively close to an older adult's home, I've seen care in 30-minute increments, an hour, 2 hours. And so it's a lot more flexible. Absolutely, in the world of private caregiving, there's a chance for the older adult and their family to meet and to interview, to go through reference checks of these private caregivers to get a real sense of what might be a good fit. And as I mentioned, as I alluded to in the previous slide, what I have found is that private caregivers, because they're able to realize essentially all of their wage, I have found that it's much easier to find a higher quality caregiver and at a lower cost going privately. But there certainly are some cons in doing so. And so one of them is that caregivers that are private typically don't get a background check. So you as a family member, as a hiring person, would need to carry out your own background check. And there's certainly a lot of different internet platforms as well as a live scan that one can do that through. Certainly, it can be a challenge if a caregiver calls off in the last minute. But usually, if you're going through a referral agency such as Partner in Aging, we can certainly accommodate. And then the last thing is, if one has long-term care insurance, I've seen long-term care insurance certainly reimburse the care when it's through an independent private caregiver, but it can be a slightly more complex situation. The other con that is not noted on my slide is that when you are a hiring person, you become hiring a private caregiver, you become the employer, and there are risks as becoming the employer, and that you need to make sure that there's workers' compensation that's covered in case the caregiver gets injured on the job. It would be smart to either issue a 1099 or W-2 to go through a legitimate payroll service as you're paying this caregiver, just so you're properly accounting for taxes. You become the employer, it becomes a little bit more cumbersome, but in my experience, you're getting a far higher quality person typically going the private route. The next slide I want to talk about is the perception of retirement communities. And this is if you're looking at the presentation, extremely blurry picture of a scene of an old movie from Happy Gilmore. And in the scene, Ben Stiller here is the nursing home administrator, and Happy Gilmore's grandmother is living in this facility, this community. And again, this was the perception. This movie came out 30 some years ago, but I think many people still have the perception that these nursing homes or these retirement communities are really awful, terrible places. These are the places that their grandparents were in 50, 60, 70 years ago. But the reality is retirement communities today are really unbelievable places, and it can be an incredible option for many people. So in the coming slides, I'm going to talk more about what that looks like for folks. So, retirement communities are broken into several different financial models. One of them is called a continuing care retirement community, or a CCRC. In the industry, we call these CCRCs, on my slide, I call it a buy-in community. So buy-in communities, CCRC communities, do not include any actual ownership. A potential person buying in will contribute hundreds of thousands up to $1 million plus. And what you're basically buying is access to get into one of these usually higher end, more luxurious communities. But you're buying somewhat of an insurance plan you buy in as an independent, healthy older adult. But at some point in the future, you very well may need additional care. And you don't want to have an escalation of costs with that future assisted living or memory care type service. And so the buy-in of hundreds of thousands or a couple million serves somewhat as a long-term care plan that the monthly cost does not escalate. As I said here, there's a significant down payment. There's no ownership, but it serves as a cost mitigator once more care is needed. In these buy-in communities, one is still obligated to pay a monthly rate in addition to their one-time initial buy-in fee. And depending on the community, and each community has a different structure as to what one gets back when they move out. There's a whole different list of scenarios. And I mean, you can ask me what my sentiments and feelings are on these buy-in communities just feel free to call or email, and I'll connect you. The most common form of a retirement community is what's the month-to-month rental option. And a retirement community, again, consists of independent living, assisted living, and memory care type living. There's usually, in these month-to-month, 30-day, you can change your mind very quickly, very little financial obligation if you change your mind. There's a small community fee in many of these month-to-month options, usually just a couple $1,000s. And within a month's notice, you can leave, and there's no, like I said, no long-term lease break or financial obligation. Retirement communities come in a variety of different levels of care. There's independent living. And in San Diego County, what I found, independent living, the range is usually between $2,500 a month and about $10,000 a month. There's assisted living, and I'll get into exactly what each different form of level of care entails. Assisted living here in San Diego is about $4,500 a month, all the way up to $10,000 a month. And the range of these prices is determined by the size of the apartment, the location of the property. Certainly, I found that coastal communities tend to be just more expensive than more inland communities. And then the amount of care that one needs usually is a cost escalator. Memory care communities is for folks who have some form of dementia, Alzheimer's, and those typically run about $5,000 to $12,000 per month. And then we have nursing homes, which a nursing home is something that Medicare covers for the first 20 days, and that typically one's private insurance will kick in for the next 80 days. And I'll get into what a nursing home is and why someone might go there. And then there are board and care homes, or little RCFE facilities, residential care for the elderly. And these are, a board and care home is a residential home just in any old neighborhood that's been outfitted and designed as an assisted living community. And I think these are great options, especially for someone that needs a lot of care, because the caregiving ratios at these board and cares tend to be better than a larger assisted living home. But these board and care tend to run from about $3,500 per month all the way up to $10,000 a month. So what retirement communities, I'm looking at my slide, continue. What is included? So care, all levels, all forms of care are included. However, if you're living in an independent living community and it's not licensed for care, and you need some extra support, you would need to bring in your own private or home care agency caregiver to provide that additional support. Food is included in the monthly rent. Cable and internet are included. Utilities such as electricity, water, trash, those are all included in that monthly rent. Transportation, these communities all have buses and town cars and can take you usually within 10 or 15 miles. But these communities often are quite flexible and they'll help you out. Hopefully not nickel and dime for any extended transport. There are daily activities at all these communities. These communities have activities directors that are constantly filling up the calendar with just a variety of different things to do. And then there's usually weekly housekeeping that's included in the monthly rent. So on the next slide, pros and cons of communities. So pros, I've put scaled care, reduction of costs. So what this means is, like I mentioned much earlier in the presentation, if one needs 24 hours of care, it could range, and there's live-in care or you're going through a home care agency, the cost will range anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000+ per month by having full-time care at home. And so if that is unaffordable or not desirable, retirement communities are a great option because they have the scaled care approach, whereas there's a caregiver in the premises or multiple caregivers on the property at all times, but it's not one-on-one care. So if you need to go to the bathroom and you need help, it might be 5 minutes or 10 minutes for that caregiver to get there, but the monthly cost is substantially lower. You could move into a nice assisted living community for $5,000 a month, opposed to having someone live in your home for $10,000, $15,000, $20,000+ a month. Another positive is that the community manages all aspects of care and well-being. And so when one is aging at home, you have to worry about the property, getting food, is the caregiver going to show up, just a whole litany of issues, finding transportation, scheduling doctor's appointments, and the community manages all of that for people. Certainly there's a transition period once someone moves into a community, but from my experience, I've noticed people tend to be happier once they've transitioned. It usually takes about a month, and once they've transitioned and living in the community. There's more social opportunities in retirement communities typically than staying at home, and this also attributes to more happiness. Care is unpredictable, and so often I'll go into someone's home and say, I'm adamant I want to stay at home. And I'll say, okay, great. What are you thinking in terms of caregiving? And they say, well, I'll take 4 hours in the morning and then I'm good the rest of the day. And it's when a care need presents, so that person might have a caregiver from 8 a.m. to noon, and then from noon all the way until the next morning, they don't have anyone. That person wouldn't have a caregiver show up. There's a large chunk of time for something to go awry. And this is where I'm saying care is unpredictable. At a community, there's a caregiver on site at all times to help to monitor if something comes about. In addition, when someone has a caregiver in their own home, there's little to no privacy. That caregiver is kind of just always there, typically in that person's space. But in a community, a caregiver, one can press a button to come in, help get me dressed, help me with my medication, and then that caregiver leaves the apartment once the job is done. And so it's a lot more, there's a lot more privacy going the retirement community route. No question, there are some drawbacks to moving to retirement communities. There is a transition period. It's not your home. Typically, there's a downsize that happens, and so you're going from a home which has a tremendous amount of your memories, let's say 1,000 square feet or 2,000 square feet or 3,000 square feet, and you downsize down to a retirement community that's maybe 500 to 700 square feet, and you can take only just a fraction of your belongings, there's no doubt a transition period to that. It's not the same. There's a more regimented schedule at retirement communities. Sometimes communities have dining hours, like breakfast is from 8 to 10 and lunch is from 12 to noon or 12 to 2, I'm sorry. And you're not used to that. At home, you can eat whenever you want, and it's less regimented, fewer rules at home. And it's not one-on-one care. And so often residents tend to be disappointed or can be disappointed when they realize, wait, I sometimes have to wait, and I'm used to getting service right away because the caregiver's there in my own home. But at a retirement community, there can be waiting periods. And so that's just something that one has to adjust to. On the next slide, we talk about insurance. A lot of questions I get on, how do I pay for this? What's covered, if anything? And so number one, the insurance is long-term care coverage and long-term care insurance. And so very few people, from what I've read, about 5 to 10% of older adults have taken out a long-term care policy. And often long-term care will cover in-home caregivers, as well as assisted living or retirement communities. This is a tremendous help for folks who have taken out this policy and that tap into it, but only 5 to 10% of our population has done so. There's another insurance called the VA Aid and Attendance, which can also help for veterans if they qualify from an income standpoint. They can qualify for some additional funds through the VA. And then if one is low income here in California, you can be on Medi-Cal. And Medi-Cal, through their IHSS or in-home supportive service, can bring caregivers to the home that's paid for. Or additionally, there is some program which is called the assisted living waiver. If someone is on Medi-Cal and low income, that the assisted living waiver can pay for some assisted living, but that's a huge challenge. So unfortunately, in the world of insurance and coverage, it's a tremendous amount of this in terms of paying for caregivers, paying for retirement communities. It really is a private pay scenario, unfortunately. Medicare does not cover this stuff. The only thing that Medicare covers is if one goes into a nursing home. And I know I mentioned earlier that I touch on nursing homes. Nursing homes are for folks who, let's say, had a fall and broke their hip or needed some form of surgery. They would go post the hospital after the surgery to a nursing home, and it's usually short term, a few weeks or a month or 2 months, to get additional rehab and physical therapy so they're strong enough, that person is strong enough to end up going back home in a very short period of time. And that's it. That's all Medicare will cover. I anticipate in the coming years and decades, as more and more seniors come to market, we're probably going to need to have the conversation, what will Medicare cover in terms of caregiving and retirement communities? So on the next slide, I talk about how can my company help and what do we do? We connect families to independent private caregivers. Over the past 4 years, we've provided thousands and thousands of hours of connections to private caregivers. In addition, not just private caregivers that help with the shower, getting dressed, these basic activities of daily life. What I've also noticed is that people can benefit from some assistant, not necessarily a caregiver, but more like a daughter for the day. Someone to go and have lunch with or to accompany to a doctor's appointment to make sure that older adult can fully understand and articulate their issue to the physician. Someone to help organize at home, help with computer stuff, something that an adult son or daughter would do, but maybe they're too busy or far away, or it's just not feasible for one way or another. So we also connect these assistants to older adults. A big part of what we also do is we know in San Diego County every single retirement community, the big ones, the small ones, and so we're able to help serve as a free complimentary service where we provide insight into which retirement community makes the most sense. Lastly, we assist in a downsize. And so what I found is one of the biggest obstacles that an older adult chooses to stay at home is they look around their house. They might live in a 3 or 4 bedroom home, and they think, oh my God, how am I possibly going to downsize and remove and move and pack up all my stuff? Forget it. I'm just going to stay here. It's just so overwhelming. And so what our company does is we can help an older adult pack up their belongings, physically move, let's say, to their next retirement community, and then unpack thoughtfully in their new home. And this is a whole industry called senior move management. And we can help our clients decide, that table will fit really well in your new kitchen. Unfortunately, let's say, for example, that couch won't be able to fit. We're going to have to either donate or sell or trash whatever piece of belonging that just doesn't make sense. So I feel really good about this move management service because it is just such a tremendous help for people and a tremendous stress reliever. We also provide real estate services. Our focus is a boutique real estate brokerage that only helps people 65 and up with their home purchase or sale. One of the added benefits, if someone lists their home with our brokerage, we pay for the physical move, the pack, we pay for all of that move management service. So we really try and be kind of a one-stop shop for people. And the last piece of what we do is we get questions all the time. Hey, where do I buy that piece of medical equipment? Or what should I do? What type of insurance should I get in terms of Medicare? We have resources all over the county of San Diego that can point someone in the right direction, because what I often say is navigating this maze of aging is really difficult. Our society has created a challenging situation, and we're trying to be that one-stop concierge service for older adults. On the next slide, we talk about some commonly asked questions. I just threw up a couple. Is how do I know when it's time to make a move? And this is a really hard one, and so there's a few pieces to this. One is what I've noticed: people at times become a prisoner in their own home. Maybe if driving is no longer a possibility, staying connected, at least here in Southern California, when you're no longer driving, staying connected to one's community becomes really difficult. And so if you're feeling overwhelmed with managing a house, overseeing all the maintenance of the home, maybe you feel like your home is no longer safe because there's stairs, you're just tired, you're tired of doing the cooking. These are some of the times to think about making a move. The other question is, I hear about when is it time for my spouse, maybe who has dementia? How do I know it's time for that person to move? And some of the red flags that I tell families is that person potentially wandering out of their house? Are they incontinent? Are they physically or verbally abusive? These are some of the red flags to really start paying attention to. And then you as the caregiver for your spouse, do you feel like your own health is compromised as a result of one's dementia diagnosis? So in my experience, I have found that people wait way too long to decide to even think about moving. I have been in the field now for 15 years, and I have never heard an individual say, I moved in too early to wherever situation. I have heard many, many, many people say, I wish I did this earlier. So I encourage you all to think about early, just to get yourself aware of what properties, what communities exist that would be something that I might want to move into in the future. Because when you can move in, let's say together as a spouse, or when you can move in when it's not an emergency, those moves always tend to be just more comfortable and easier. Next question I get is, moving is very hard. Is there someone to assist with the downsize? I encourage wherever you live, whether it's San Diego County or anywhere else, there is a list of senior move managers that can provide a tremendous service for people for a few $1,000s, if that. Quick story, I was helping someone several years ago at a retirement community I worked at. She was in her early 80s. It seemed to be in extremely good health. I referred her to a local move management company that I liked a lot. She chose to do the move entirely herself, packing up, hired a moving company, and then tried unpacking at the retirement community. And doing this all by herself, she came to the community. She looked about 10, 15 pounds less, significantly weaker. When she was unpacking her own stuff in the community, she had a fall, broke her hip, and unfortunately, she never made it out of skilled nursing after that. And so I really do think that these moves, from a stress standpoint, from a physical standpoint, are far easier when one can outsource it. So I would highly encourage finding a senior move manager, and I can, if you want, call me, email, and I can send you a list of in your local area. Another question is, I don't need a caregiver, rather I'd like a personal assistant to help me age in place. Where do I go about finding one? Well, if you live in San Diego County, definitely reach out to me. I can point you in the right direction. But a couple other good resources would be platforms such as Facebook, or if you have the Nextdoor platform, just to send a message. There are a ton of people out there that are looking to do kind of gig work. A few hours here, a few hours there, and that person can really make a difference and help you age in place at home and just make life a lot easier. So for today's presentation, going to the last slide, you can see my name, the name of my company, my phone number, my email address. Thank you for the opportunity to speak and for listening. I would love to hear from you for any additional questions. Please feel free to reach out at any time. And I look forward to being in touch. Bye-bye.